This is our radial arm saw. It's an older tool. It's been around for a long time, very versatile, but its primary purpose is for cross cutting. What we have is it allows us to pull it out and make our cut. It extends outward, cutting through our board, and then we must retract it back through. We have the nice flat table to set our wood on. We have a fence that works as a backstop to hold our piece in place. So it's important as we go to make our cuts with this. I've got a board here with a pencil line of where I want to cut to. I'm going to set it down here on the table, slide it up and support it with the fence. Then with the saw off, I'll bring it out and I'm going to squat down and look underneath a little bit where the blade is going to hit the wood, and I want that blade to ride right alongside the pencil line. So if I have a pencil line like this, and this is my good side over here, my blade has a kerf of 1/8 of an inch. I want to chew up that material over there, not right in the middle of the line. So I'll set this down here, I hold it up against the fence. I keep my left hand out here, but my left hand, I'm leaning down into it, pressing down and forward. Again, with it off, I line up the cut. And then I push it back, then I can turn on the saw, pulling outward. So I made my cut, I'm pulling the saw outward, holding the board down. Once I make my cut, then I have to push the saw back in. It's important that I hold onto the handle firmly and pull it slowly, especially when you go to do harder woods or thicker woods. The saw has a tendency to want to pull itself out, and sometimes what can happen is the blade will stop spinning, and it's called choking. Then when it can't cut through the wood fast enough, it's going to choke the blade and stop it from spinning, in which case we want to try to push it back and turn it off. Sometimes it's nice to cut a bunch of things the same size. So there's a couple ways we can do it. And really, this saw I use for rough cutting. It's not the most accurate, it's not the most precise, it's not the cleanest cutting, but it's a good way to break materials down to something more manageable. So one thing I could do is just to stack a couple of boards up together, and there I have my pencil mark. I can line it up and cut like that. So stacking a couple of boards together. Okay. The other thing I can do is use the clamp here to clamp in a piece of wood called a stop block. Just use a scrap piece or whatever and clamp it in a distance I want. Clamp this down. Now every piece of wood I slide up against here is going to cut to the same size. Keep getting pieces, cut and cut. But we got to make sure when we're using a stop block or we're cutting multiple pieces, if we have any scrap pieces or sawdust fill in here up against the stop block or against the fence, that's going to make our cut inaccurate. So we got to make sure we clean out any sawdust out of there. If any pieces of wood get stuck up by the blade or anything, don't try to reach in there to get them out. Okay, turn off the saw, wait for it to come to a stop, return it back, and we can deal with that once everything is stopped. Be safe, wear our safety glasses, keep our hands off to the side. I like to hold my left hand down here with the piece, my right hand on the saw. Here we have our sliding power miter saw. Similar to the radial arm saw, it is a cross-cutting saw. That's its primary purpose, is cross-cutting. But differently, this is designed for very smooth and accurate cuts. The blade has a lot more teeth on it, which means that it's going to give us a finer, smoother overall finish. It works a little differently in a few ways, but we still have kind of a table flat surface here. We have the fence in back that we need to use to support it. So when we go to make our cut, we'll set our piece of wood down on that table area and hold it up against the fence. I look at the pencil line. The sliding miter saw is going to drop down, and I'm looking to where my teeth are. There is a laser on this one that helps, but I always like to make sure that I look at where the teeth of the saw blade are so I know where it's going to hit. So I'm holding with my left hand, putting pressure down against the table and against the fence. I'm going to pull the trigger on it, drop the saw straight down into it, then let off the trigger, wait for the blade to stop before I raise it up. Let's give it a shot. I wait for it to stop because if I raise it back up, the teeth on the blade will actually come past here and put some more scratches back into the end of our board, which right now is a really smooth cut. Other thing about the miter saw, and miter in general means to cut at an angle. Miter saws will click into a variety of angles. We can adjust the angle on it. They have some preset ones that are common angles. So our most common straight out is our 90 or 0 degrees really. It gives us a 90-degree corner here. We also have, the second most common would be 45 degrees. 45 degrees, we can make that miter so that we can make a square like a picture frame. Or if we split that in half, we can come down to 22.5 degrees, which is what we'd use for something to make like 8 sides. That's 45 degrees in half. You can use 2 pieces mitered at 22.5 to make a 45-degree corner, something like that. Those are our most common ones we deal with. Now, when we're cutting miters at an angle, the saw does have a tendency to kick the scrap pieces more. These little scrap pieces, there's not a lot of support right behind the fence, so you just got to be a little careful and be aware that sometimes that piece might fling behind it. But it's the same process. I'm going to hold on very tightly to the piece of wood, because at an angle, it's going to want to try to pull the wood just a little bit as we're cutting it. So I want to make sure I'm pressing forward against the fence and down, and make my cut. Wait for the blade to stop. I can slide the piece away a little bit before I let it up. Now, what's great about this sliding miter saw is in addition to just doing normal miter saw stuff like I just did, the sliding function allows us to cut wider boards like the radial arm saw can. So for this, we can slide it to cut through this wider board. Now, whenever possible, we just want to cut straight down, but if it is a wider board, this saw works a little bit differently. We pull it back like this first, and we drop it down, and we push through to do the cut. The radial arm saw, remember, we were pulling out, but the miter saw, we want to push to do our cut. Okay, so let's give it a shot here. Drop it down, I'm going to start it, drop down into it, and push through it. Wait for it to stop, lift it up, and I have my nice and clean cut now. Remember, just like before with the radial arm saw, the saw kerf on this is about 1/8 of an inch. We want to make sure we're cutting on the correct side of our line. You know, if there's my pencil line, I want the blade to be on the scrap side so it chews up that material. And there's sawdust and little scraps that could be flying anywhere, so make sure you wear your safety glasses.